Do you actually have a jingle for me?
Yeah. I'm snapping my fingers.
You're snapping so you don't have to sing.
Yeah. That's my singing. It's very.
Do you have good? What about some good like strike chants? Was there anything in particular that everyone knows that you can go to?
The problem is when you actually work in such a multilingual context is that none of us actually speak one single language, and that also entails on like how our culture in regards to chants are. So we had like one basic chant that actually like started also coming to the other demonstrations and strikes that we did, which was no more pay cuts, and that's not really like.
In English, everyone would say no more.
Yeah,
pay
no
cuts.
more pay cuts. We just said no
Okay.
more pay cuts. Yeah, but we also had another one which was really nice that I actually heard for the first time, which was like Wolt, shame on you. So like you yelled that instead. So like trying to shame the company, and
Okay.
that's not like very vocal in like a really nice musical way. As you can probably hear, like Danish is always like this monotonous. So like trying to ask me to be like in a more like Italian kind of chant, like football chant, not gonna happen, man.
You don't need to be somebody you're not. You can just say like, in fact, how about like, Wolt. If you just repeat that a couple times, that should do the trick. Okay, this is where I'm supposed to introduce the podcast and say, hello, welcome to Späti. It's just Rob here today because we are talking about union organizing, wage labor, and all of those fun things. Today I'm joined by two friends of mine from Copenhagen in the Wolt Workers Group. Why don't you introduce yourselves? Freya, you can go first.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. So hey, I'm Freya, and yeah, I'm a union activist, and I've been active in what we call the Wolt Workers Group in Denmark, which is like a grassroots activist group where we try to organize fellow platform delivery workers. I've been active in that for 2 years, and also worked a bit as a courier myself for the Danish branch of Deliver Hero, which used to be called Hungry. Now it's called Fedora. So yeah, that's me.
And Rasmus, you are the troublemaker. You're the reason we're here today. So please tell us why we're assembled.
Yeah, so my name is Rasmus, also known as Gazellen on the streets. That's my courier name. It was actually something I picked up while I was working as a paper bike messenger, but it has stuck ever since. I've been active as a rank and filer in Wolt for 10 months. 10 months of happiness and cooperation, I might say. It's been a hell of a ride. I've been trying to, with my colleagues, to try and organize for better working conditions with Freja as well. That did cost my job. So I guess that's why we're here. I don't know.
Just a quick side note for the listeners. When Rasmus says that his quote-unquote street name is Gazelle and that it has stuck, I think it has mainly stuck with Rasmus and hasn't stuck with that many other people.
No. If you ask any bike messenger, the street Copenhagen will call me. Yeah. It's true. You have no like empirical evidence, which is like a case on case in regards to evidence. So I can say whatever I want.
Well, I do. Rasmus, I do. It does. I do have the impression that Rasmus can make some things go viral, and he made this podcast happen. So I guess I'm inclined to believe him.
Yeah.
We will talk about why we're assembled here today, and a little bit about the state of organizing in the delivery sector in Denmark and in Copenhagen. But first, I think we need to go through some of the background, some of the history, because it's different in every country. I feel like I still don't fully understand all the rules in Denmark and the organizing culture and the union culture. So I guess we should start there. But because this is Späti and because our listeners love one thing and one thing above all, I need to ask you about the recent elections in Denmark. Do you have any comments? Anything that would be relevant for our discussion today? Any particularly crazy characters or exciting stories that to entertain our lovely listeners?
I guess one thing that we might like comment on is that we actually got a formed government now. But I don't know if do you have anything really exciting to add about the elections? They were really boring, actually.
Elections were quite boring. So I guess to understand the current parliamentarian situation in Denmark right now, so we have had almost 4 years with like a center-left government. And even though we had a lot of austerity and stuff, we also saw like actual improvements for the first time in very long. Now there's been recent, essentially a month ago, we had elections, and now there's been a center-right government formed with the Social Democrats and the Liberal Party and our like center-right party. It looks very bleak. Yes, I guess that could be the name of the center-right party. This is a very weird, like, internal Danish fact, but if that's what the listeners want. So the name of the center-right party is Moderaterne, and it's a very new party. And there's a very famous Danish political drama called Born, where the lead is like, she's a social liberal as well. And she's portrayed as like this, like amazing politicians with very high moral standards. And her party is called Moderaterne. Mm-hmm. So they stole the new party in the government has literally stolen the name of a TV show.
Yeah.
So I think the TV show could have been more creative. They're trying to. Is it really so simple? That's what people want. That's what people want. Moderation.
But so now our the parliament situation is also that you see both political leanings from the left and the right being essentially put out of what you can say influence in regards to that we have a center-right government, so they will just continue doing like the status quo that we have been seeing with the austerity measures, as Freja has mentioned before, and also for the first time we also see like that they are not only just looking with this new government. They have like made a document and told like what is going to happen, not only for this election cycle, but like it's a very timeless document. So now we're just going to see a Denmark that's going to be like less Scandinavian socialism, Bernie like interesting stuff for Americans to look at, I guess. And what else is to say? We had a former Minister of Immigration who actually got put into jail for breaking some human rights laws. Now she's in the fourth biggest, I think it's the third biggest party in the parliament now. So it's going to go really, really, really right wing and very, very center. So just like every other European country, I guess.
Yeah, and this despite the fact, as I understand, that the center-left bloc that was the previous government technically had enough seats in order to continue the bloc, but then the social democrats sided with the center.
You don't question the social democratic narrative, man. Like that's the thing.
No, that's a very good point, Rob, and I think that's very central also to understand that like the nature of the Danish social democracy, like they have actively chosen to side with the right this time. And I mean, historically speaking, they've been like right-leaning or like very center-leaning for many decades now. We had like during like the like late 2000s or like 2010, 2011, 2012, we also had a social democratic government that carried through some of the like worst austerity measures that we've seen for a long time. So it's not really a surprise, but it just confirms that they're not siding with the left. And it's been a very long time since they were an actual left-wing party.
What, if anything, does this mean for unions and for labor rights and for organizing? My impression is that it's less than, or not so much, actually. Can you explain why that is?
So I actually think there is something to comment on. in regards to this, because our unions have been actually very um, ac- active in the elections of trying to push against the idea of electing a right wing government. So I don't know if you remember the whole discussion about the mink culling, like the cull of minks. It went around like the whole
Yeah.
internet for quite a while, and like there has been like an outrage against the whole Danish political establishment, which was the right wing in parliament has like tried to fetch on and tried actually to make their own narrative in regards to like we don't ever want Mette Frederiksen, our current prime minister and also our minister last election cycle, to actually be electable ever again. What the unions actually tried to do this there was also show that because there was like a lot of like movement in regards to getting support from the right wing, essentially also from some of these deindustrialized areas in Denmark. Believe it or not, Denmark is a small country, but you can actually see that there is actually like a divide in regards to like workplaces and industry, and as well as and like older workplaces actually move into Eastern Europe. So we had, for example, our union 3F, which is also the one organizing the food delivery sector. Henning Overgaard, he's our big guy. He's our union boss. He was saying, you don't vote for the right wing because they will take away your pension and they will cut down your unemployment benefits and stuff like that. Then we also had like a really long discussion in regards to, like trying to get like the whole just with like the European minimum wage. In Denmark, we have a free association of like collective bargaining, so we don't have a minimum wage in Denmark, which is like federally governed. So like he was trying to push that, and along with the other unions. But what essentially happened is they actually backs down on this claim after. So he said actually like not even like complimenting or congratulating on forming a new government, but also like it was pretty ambitious. Like he said, like it's a pretty ambitious government that they're trying to make now. Where you're just like, what the fuck, man? Like you don't even like feed the dog with your hand. You give the whole hand and then you give the entire body and then you just crawl in the dog's mouth. I don't understand. It's really weird. So like with our union organizing now, we have a really weird situation where politically our union leadership is trying to figure out with this new that we don't have the same interests anymore. Like you can't go to the socialist parties and ask for them to fight for your legislation because we don't have that electoral backing anymore. So I think right now they try to reconfigure or engineer themselves into this influence, but I don't know. I don't think it's gonna happen. So we're gonna see probably like a union leadership that is going to be very either passive or very reactionary in regards to like trying to say if we fight too much or are too aggressive during also because we also soon have like collective bargaining agreement negotiations for 2023, it can destroy something else. So they're like, let's not be too pushy. Um, so this does have an impact on our organizing as well.
And yeah, just to follow up on that really quickly. So what the new government has stated that they want to do is that they want to increase. It's like classic new liberal politics, like ABC, following the manual. So they're gonna increase the labor surplus, meaning they're gonna take away a holiday. They're gonna reform the educational sector, so people are forced to get through the education faster. There might also, in Denmark, we have like a student benefit. They might also try to make that into like a private loan or something along those lines. They're probably also going to lower the unemployment benefits, like all the classic austerity measures that we know way too well. And yeah, as Rasmus said, like as in every other like at least every other European country, the social democracy and the union movement are very entangled. A lot of people who are elected as union officers or like chairs of unions are a member of the Social Democrats, and they are not going to criticize the government of the party that they're a member of, or they're at least going to do it very mildly. This means that the chances that we're gonna like see, yeah, as Rasmus said, like aggressive measures, strikes being called, and all this is going to be lowered. The good news is that a lot of things in the Danish labor law are not left to the politicians to regulate, but that's left to like the general agreements. So in that regard, maybe, yeah, like that, if the Danish system was different, there could be less damage. But it's definitely looking bleak.
Can you elaborate on that and what I think it's maybe not intuitive for a lot of listeners that like the powers that trade unions have, at least over regulation, setting things like benefits, setting things like not a minimum wage, but some regulating the wages that people get. Can one of you explain how unions work in Denmark and what that means for organizing?
So I can try to elaborate briefly of what's most important when you are in such a situation as like when you become like a worker after you are getting your first job. Like what's really important for you for good measure in regards to like know of your legislation. So every workplace is regulated by two things. Either it's a general agreement, or we also have a very mild law in regards to work environment, and this is in regards to like how much that you can carry, like the degrees in your workplace, how many hours you're supposed to work during a shift. So like you need a resting period, which is 14 hours between the shift, for example. And then we have stuff in regards to pay. That's all in the general agreements. These are free associations. So this has been regulated in Denmark and also the other Scandinavian countries in a free association in regards of you have two different branches. So like a union federation and an employer association meeting up to negotiate general agreements. Usually this happens in a very bureaucratized way. So it's for the most valuable sectors are the first ones that are actually doing agreements. We have agreements every second year. Every second year, the first private sector starts to negotiate, and then the public sector starts to negotiate. This negotiation process can take a while. Usually it takes over also first a year for them actually like to try to make out a draft in regards to like what do we think about pay increases, what do we think about how much time that we have to work, what do we think about pension, stuff like that. And then afterwards they actually have to go through like a democratic process. And when I'm saying democratic, it's democratic by proxy. So they actually meet up these two branches and meet and talk. And after that, a draft is put forward as this is what we can vote on. And usually it's the metal workers union that actually start. And for what they vote on, if they vote for a very, very, very shitty agreement, this will reflect on every other sector. Because it starts on who's actually like the most valuable workforce, the most valuable sector is like the one that's actually like most important for the labor power. So in regards to like stuff with like unemployment benefits, work environment, stuff like that, that is legislation that's like directly under parliament. But other than that, this is like regulated between these two branches here. And then we have a labor court, and that might sound really weird because if it's a free association, how can they set up their own court? It's just a private court. If you are not like a recognized union, you can't actually go to court. So that means that like if you have problems with your boss, stuff like that, and you're not unionized, you can't actually go to take this into court. So that's like briefly how this has been working, and like this is like a compromise that was made in a big labor dispute called Storlockouten. The big lockout, is if we have to translate to our international audience here, in 1899, and this historical background shows, for example, that it started with like unions forming up to make a larger federation, and the employers being really afraid on like what's going to happen here, and then there was a 6-month dispute, and after that they had to negotiate to like how for the society to run. Like this is like the social democratic narrative, and one of the things there is like to recognizing the unions as the right to negotiate on behalf of workers, but also the corporations' right actually to regulate your workforce, which is like work stoppage is not allowed anymore. For example, like you can't just like you actually have to announce when you want to strike, and you can't strike if you're not if these negotiations break down. But there is one exception. It's called like life welfare, like work and health safety regulations. So, for example, if I'm working as a delivery worker, and it's not just like we get like a typhoon or something that's gonna hit Copenhagen. Let's imagine that won't happen, not right now at least. I can say we don't want to go out and work because like this threatens my work and health safety, for example. But that's like the only reason where you can actually do the striking. So this was my very brief introduction. This I hope it makes sense.
So yeah. Also, just to like add to that, so whenever Danish school kids are taught about the Danish labor market, there's always one thing that they're taught, and it always shocks people who are not from Denmark as well, and that is that Denmark doesn't have a minimum pay for the reasons that Rasmus just mentioned. So minimum pay, holiday, sick leave, all those things are not in the like labor law that's agreed on in general agreements. This means a company that does not have a general agreement can pay their employees like 50 cents if they want to an hour. It's not illegal. If they've signed a general agreement, it's illegal. But if they haven't, they can legally do it. So yeah, that is one quite crucial thing to understand about the general agreement system in Denmark.
What if I signed in a general agreement saying to pay that I accept 50 cents as pay? Like, how do general agreements affect each other?
So that wouldn't happen. Like the thing is that unions would like negotiate on like there's a standard for the industry.
Yeah. One thing that keeps surprising me in talking to both of you is that a lot of things are based off of I don't know, like implicit agreements or the way things are done, or this is just like the standard you operate off of. And then, for example, you get fired, Rasmus, and they're like, well, they're not supposed to do that. And I'm like, well, it seems like they're not supposed to do it, but this system to me, I wouldn't feel very comfortable with it personally, just saying like, no, it's the way things are done. It'll keep being done this way.
Yeah. Well, like I think in regards to my situation, and I think we will probably go more into that as well. What was actually a problem here is that I'm seen as a small company, and because I'm not and along with a lot of other delivery workers under these conditions are misclassified, and when we are misclassified as not as workers, legislation and the social dialogue around it, like holiday pay, sick leave, maternal leave, all of this is put out of place. And when that happens, for example, they can fire me from one day to another. And of course, yeah, this is not like an ideal. I think for us, in a Danish context, we'd like for like this misclassification to end. Like we want to get reclassified as workers. But the problem here right now in like the Danish labor market, we don't have a common like your residual legislative term on what is a worker. And because we don't have that, they can do this. Like in every small bit of law, some might indicate that you're a worker, but not a general, comprehensive one. So that's why companies like this can do it. And this is like a very Danish thing.
Yeah, and I think that also like you hit a very sore spot, Rob, because there are so many cracks in this model, and I mean, understanding the general agreement system, not just in Denmark, I would say, but like the way that it is in many European countries, is also to understand that this is a system that's based on the idea of collaboration. It's based on the idea that both workers and employers have an interest in stability. So the employers, the capitalists, have an interest in workers not striking all the time, and being able to produce like fairly steadily. Workers have an interest in not having their pay cut overnight, and also have some like minimal amount of social security. And this is the compromise that the whole like general agreement system is based on. Then now we have the problem that there are, I mean, after decades of neoliberalism, more and more companies are not interested in having a stable workforce. They're interested in having this turnover workforce that they can use one day and throw away the next day. And that is what we see with these platform like companies. That is how me and you and Rasmus have been employed. And the problem is that the general agreement system is not geared for this. It doesn't know how to handle it, and it doesn't know how to combat it. And right now, the Danish unions are shitting themselves because union density has declined and will continue to decline. And this whole model is also based on enough companies signing general agreements and enough workers being organized. So when we are in a situation where union density is declining, unions do not manage to actually organize, they do not manage to deal with cope with this new context, then, I mean, there are more and more cracks in the system, and our labor market is getting more insecure.
I'd like to ask about one thing in particular, which is the that union density is going down, which it is, I think, in most countries, people are familiar with that. But in Denmark in particular, that there are like apolitical, or you could even say yellow unions, are also increasing in numbers from that share. Could you explain that dynamic and why people might switch to those unions?
Yeah, so in 2019, I believe, there was a report released that concluded that like union density was down to like 53%. If we go back to the 90s, union density was up around like 70% on average. 53% is now the new average. They try to track where, like, how has this happened? And as you said, a lot of people have actually quit the membership of the traditional unions and then signed up in like a so-called apolitical or yellow union. And I think, to answer your question, the reason for this also comes down to during the late 90s, the 2000s, there was this whole idea that like liberalism had prevailed, and this like very individualist discourse, and unions tried to tap into this. Like they were like, okay, our discourse about solidarity and community is outdated, it's out of fashion. Then they hired a shit ton of like very expensive consultant companies to come up with a new discourse. So one of the major unions in Denmark, the Office Worker Union, for instance, and I always use this example because it's very sad, but it's very it illustrates the point very well. The Office Worker Union used to have the slogan "Together we are stronger." In the 2000s, they changed their slogan to "Together you are stronger." So the traditional unions have very knowingly, eyes open, tried to tap into this individualist discourse, tried to frame themselves as provider of a service, provider of some sort of security. If you get fired, you can get help. We have lawyers, they can help you. The problem is, though, that it also means that less and less people have active experience with labor struggle. We have had strikes, and there are like you can, like, if you look at like scaffolders or nurses, like there are groups on the Danish labor market that have very active experience with struggle. But the general picture, I would say, and you can correct me, Rasmus, but if you disagree, is that more and more people have zero experience with what a union actually is. And then these apolitical unions try to like the appeal of them is essentially that they say you can get a lot of the same security that you get from the other unions, just cheaper, because these apolitical unions do not negotiate the general agreements. So of course they can undercut the traditional unions, and a lot of people sign up in these unions because they've lost faith in the traditional unions. They haven't felt any improvement in their actual work life, and then they think, well, might as well just get the security that I need as a worker, but get it for cheaper money.
Yeah, I think I mostly also like agree on the analysis of fire, but I think while the emergence of like alternative unionism, because let's call it that as well, like of yellow unions and like trying to look into like this individualist ideology, more or less we also see a different trend, which I'd say and would argue is arguably stronger, is the idea of not doing anything, like the apathy that people are not even joining yellow unions. So like the whole thing of like trying to get yourself involved in an organization that talks about your workplace, that discussion or discourse is not essentially gone, but it's heavily restricted to a private sphere. That we see now that people, instead of trying to fight for their workplaces, they leave their workplaces instead. We talk about like a silent, what is called the big silent quitting. What's it called again? The whole stuff about like people leaving their jobs very silently. Um, I think if you look on the Danish situation in that, I think it's a very interesting cultural phenomena going on. Uh, this also has something to do with people trying to take and leave with the standards as they are right now. And I think what happened, if we have to look back in the 90s as well, is that we have one entire generation of people who got disillusioned, apathetic about their workplace situation. You can see it on the statistics in regards to like people leaving their jobs much more quicker. People don't have the same kind of like um, uh, sustainability on the labor market as, for example, our grandparents had. And I think that has a very strong indication also why do you want to pay dues to something that you essentially will never actually get something about.
And so the impression I get is that I think some people could look at this situation, especially with even 53% is a much higher union density than a lot of other countries in Europe. But it's almost like the system has produced a lot of. It seems to me that the best that you can call these apolitical unions like free riders, because there is already a collective agreement. There's already a system in place. There is a new collective agreement negotiated every 2 or 3 years. And because the system is continuing as such, then every individual, there's an incentive for a group to try to undercut that, and you can pay few. You still get the benefits covered by the collective agreement, but this union is just going to offer you the minimum benefits that come with the union agreement because it doesn't come from the government. And then everyone there's like an incentive to hollow out maybe that agreement. And going back to it's just the way things are done in Denmark. Every 2 or 3 years, there will be a new collective agreement negotiated. But it seems to me until 1 year, there won't be, because that base is slowly being carved out from the inside.
And that is something that we fight for, because that narrative, it's funny to see how like our union officials, our union leadership in the general union movement in Denmark is actually responding to this. Instead of actually trying to figure out which future sectors are emerging, which future sectors do we actually need to get involved, they try to point at you and accuse you and say, how dare you not join our unions? Don't you remember the social foundation, the social dialogue? Like they tell you outright, like a teacher talking to you, that like all of these lessons, if you're not a member of this, then they try to shame you. And I don't think that's like an indicative way of like trying to negotiate, or make your workforce actually be interested in their workplace. And a really interesting thing for this as well. A lot of big workplaces today, like we have big supermarkets and stuff like that. We have like general agreements, but you don't have any union representatives. You don't have any union organizing, and the workers union, not workers union, the office workers union, they're also workers. To recorrect, we might have to edit this out anyway. One of their first historical negotiations was with our local worker co-op supermarkets called Co-op. It's actually one of the worst negotiations or collective bargainings now. So even the things that we have right now, even if they have been collectively bargained and negotiated, like just this week, 316 people from one of these companies just got laid off, and they won't get another job because the general agreements are shit. So like they're left on their own. They can go on their unemployment benefits, but they probably won't get a job back in this shop or franchise.
And that's also, I mean, the dilemma that you sort of raise, Rob, of like the free rider dilemma. Like it's a bit of a classic, and it's a like dilemma that the like Danish union movement and a lot of other union movements around the world are also struggling with. The whole question of we negotiate, but whatever the outcome of the negotiations is, apply to everyone. So you have seen examples of Danish union trying to incorporate like tiny benefits into the general agreement that only applies to union members to try to combat this tendency. But the problem is that if that's the strategy they choose, then you can also very, very quickly end up with like a top and a bottom labor market, like an A and a B, which I mean we also have today. It's not like that's not the situation today. I mean, also speaking of your situation, Rasmus, like getting fired from one day to another, that would not happen to a nurse or a scaffolder. So, yeah, it's like it is definitely a bit of a dilemma. But yeah, it's also the whole question of like one of the classic arguments that unions always use is that the more members there are, the better the negotiations outcome. But the problem is that, as you said, Rasmus, the outcome of the negotiations have been shit overall the past years. Like we haven't had a real wage increase for decades, like every other European country, right? So that argument is becoming more and more shallow, and less people believe it. And then the unions try to tap into this idea of the historical debt that you mentioned, Rasmus. And a lot of the people I've talked to, also people who are very left-leaning, when they have to describe what they associate unions with, they would say the emergence of the welfare sector, the emergence of the labor movement. Historically speaking, there's a lot of like this idea of the historical debt that we owe to the unions is very strong in Denmark, and it's something that a lot of also young people are very conscious about. Problem is that it's not enough to convince people to spend a fair proportion of the salary on a membership, necessarily speaking.
And to be honest, like I can totally understand, and like to come into the core of this discussion,
Definitely.
we have to put in some terms to this, like this emergence of lecturing and this like general disproportionate influence or like democratic discussion in the unions is like because of business unionism, that we have unions that run like businesses. They try to provide you a product rather than this actually being a democratic member organization. I am not subscribing to the ideal that we try to make an A and a B team with collective bargaining agreements. Collective bargaining agreements are strategic, and if there's something that I've really understood being a non-unionized worker with a union membership in a workplace that's heavily non-unionized, like the Wild West, I would also argue that you have to build also on a force, not necessarily of people who are actually paying dues, but people that you can count with, like people who are actually interested in you, people that you can connect with, like a general understanding on solidarity. Like it's a term that we have been misusing, abusing. It's been assaulted. It's probably gotten beaten up like over 200 years soon. Like everyone says solidarity, it's the left and the right. I even say it myself sometimes. And honestly, I think it's a fucking cliche sometimes. Like I hate the fucking term. But if we generally want to do this union stuff and be serious about it, we need to talk about how can we have a value in our organizing sector, not sector, our organizing work, which looks on solidarity. Uh, because if this doesn't add up, then these negotiations will continue, as I say, and that's not good for the future, and it will also undermine the whole Danish welfare state, which is not even a problem. I don't give a shit anymore.
I want to ask about some of those, let's say, new directions or new kinds of organizing that are, let's say, growing through the cracks in the Danish labor model. I'd like to ask about the unions themselves, because I know, like in a lot of countries, in Germany, it's certainly the same. In the U.S., there's some unions have rediscovered organizing. What's the state of that in Denmark?
I think I would like to return to my favorite example, the Office Workers Union. I used to work there actually as a student assistant. And when I worked there back in 2017, I was called in for a employee seminar. All the employees of the union were sat down in the cafeteria, and then we had a talk from one of the top level union officials, where he explained to us that now the whole thing, the whole concept, the whole foundation of the Office Workers Union was being redirected. Now the Office Workers Union was to be the organizing union, as if they had invented this holy grail. But I definitely think that we see a lot of unions are becoming aware of the fact that this strategy of tapping into the liberal discourse about unions being a way to secure yourself has definitely not worked out. So now they're trying to return to the concept of organizing. But they do it in a way where they hire a lot of people as quote unquote organizers. If we go back to the 60s and 70s, no unions had a person that was hired as an organizer. You had local shop stewards, and then you had union officers who did some of the negotiations, but you didn't hire anyone to organize because that was taken care of locally. So unions are trying to return to organizing, but they're also doing it in a way where, they try to professionalize it. They hire people to do it full time. And in my experience, a lot of the people who are then hired as organizers, they do their best, definitely. But usually they end up recruiting members instead of spending a lot of time building relations with people. And building relations with people is what organizing is about, right? and there's definitely also because of the because union density is decreasing, there's also a lot of pressure from the top of the union to increase membership. So if you're hired as an organizer, there's also an expectancy that we have to look at the numbers, kind of, right? Like, have you increased union density in the sectors that you've been focusing on? And I think I talked to one of me and Rasmus's friends, Jack, who also used to work as a courier and has been employed as an organizer to organize the delivery sector. And he's worked as an organizer now for 2 years. And Jack and Rasmus, you went to Brussels, right? Just last week, and I think you can elaborate on this, Rasmus, but where they, as far as I understood, you met some people from the Netherlands who also had worked on organizing the food delivery sector, but where the focus had not been on recruiting members, but had been on this, building up relations and trying to organize bottom up. I don't know if you want to elaborate on that, but I think that would be the way to go about it, more than what we're seeing currently.
Yeah, I don't think it needs more elaboration. But I agree on the sentiments that Freja is exposing, because those sentiments are really important to understand, like how organizing has been done before. I think what has happened, and I want to go back to this point again, is that our grievances on our workplace is becoming more and more and more in a prioritized way, more of an internal shaming. Like, all of the grievances that you have had, I am not getting paid enough, perhaps it's because I'm not performing too well on my job, it's just a shit job, this sector is shit, I have to find something else, or, well, my boss was telling me off because I've not been doing enough, or I have to compete with my colleagues. Like, this internal grievance, like this devil on your shoulder, like, this is like pure ideology, as Zizek would have said. And for me, changing that has been a hell of a way of trying to understand what has gone wrong, because I can talk to Danes about organizing and work conditions and all of these grievances, and people can agree, and they know the story, or how the unions were formed and stuff like that, but they're not inclined to do stuff, because I think the ideology on trying to internalize this too much to yourself has something to do with it. But then, for example, my sector where I'm organizing now and current and all and been in and gonna stay in as well, is dominantly in another space where people are from backgrounds where they don't have the same kind of privilege. A privilege where they don't have the same kind of entry to getting a higher, climbing up the ladder because they speak Danish, or they have a red passport. So these people, they rely a lot on their communities as well, because one of the ways that you try to survive or try to enter society is through communities. So trying to reconfigure that, trying to meet my colleagues where they are at, for example, coming home to people, learning a lot about why people are here, has been for me one of the strongest ways of trying to unionize, by not actually trying to unionize. I haven't been pushing the union book. I haven't told them you need to read your fucking general agreement so you can get your wages up. No, it's been going out and eating our national dish with a colleague, for example. Or
what's the national dish?
The steak flæsk med persillesauce. It's that's pig, pork in persil sauce.
Does that work? Does that work usually?
What?
Does someone join the union after they eat it?
No, yeah, of course. No. but we gain confidence in this, like because I trying to invite people into spaces is really good, and for me, that's not something I had been able to do with every Dane. Like, Danes are shy, and I think they're shy because the internal grievances, it has been adding up, and it's an ideological, historical process happening since the 90s.
Also, just quick comment: no one is ever going to get organized if you tell them sit down and read your general agreement. General agreements are very unsexy to read. I never read my general agreement, and like the national dish that Rasmus has mentions, it definitely splits the waters, but it's more sexy than the general agreement. That's for sure.
Can we? I'd like. I don't want to lose some of these threads, but I want to ask you both about the nurses' strike, because I think it gets at a lot of these the dynamics you're talking about, and I think it's a interesting, inspiring, but also just interesting story. Can Freya, maybe can you start from the beginning, how it came about and what happened?
Yes. So, if someone asked me, like how the feminist movement looked like in Denmark, and when someone asks me what's going on in the broader labor movement, I usually point to the nurses. So what happened was that in 2021, we had general agreements for the public sector. As everywhere else, nurses had been running insanely fast during Corona, put on a lot of pressure. Back then, during the height of the pandemic, they demanded a higher pay, and they were told you have to wait to the general agreements or the negotiations about the general agreements. That's how the system works. Then they waited. There were negotiations. The result was, not very good, to put it mildly. And the argument for why they had to accept that was that was Corona, so now there was also an economic crisis, and you couldn't, like, public spending had already increased, you couldn't increase public spending more by giving out higher wages. This general agreement was put to a vote. And this general agreement covers the whole public sector in Denmark, not just the nurses. The nurses, though, they were the only group that voted no to this proposal. Keynote on the nurses: the nurses have been like pulling off a big strike every decade. They pulled off a big strike in the 90s. They pulled off a big strike in 2008. And they voted no again. Like, the nurses they're bitter and they're ready to fight for it. So they striked over the course of a month during summer 2021. As some of the people listening might remember, 2021, the summer 2021 was also the summer of the Euro Cup. So they striked in July, and if you had to pick a month to strike in, July is probably the worst month. All the other public sector unions abandoned them. Like, there were a few unions that supported them, but it was mainly the minor, more like radical left-wing unions. And the government, which was back then the Social Democratic center-left government, also ignored them. So the strike drowned in Euro Cup and holiday and stuff. Then fast forward to August, then the government intervenes and stops the strike. And this is another very important crack to highlight in the so-called general agreement model in Denmark, that the government has the power. The government holds the power to stop a strike, to intervene and stop a strike. This is based on the idea that the state is some sort of like neutral player in the game. And in the case of the public sector, this becomes very contradictory, more than it is with the private sector, because the government is also the ones that sets the public budgets, obviously. So the government intervened, stopped the strike. Fast forward 2 months, then the nurses start a wildcat strike. It's very disorganized at first. It starts with just one group of nurses walking out as a way to protest, and then the same happens at a different hospital a week later, and then they start doing rounds, essentially. So they take turns striking, different workers at different hospitals. They strike for an hour a day because it's a legal strike, so they're fined for every hour they're striking. And this continued until late November. And this was very significant. You don't see public sector workers wildcard striking very often. And it's also significant because it was organized completely by the nurses themselves. It was organized via Facebook groups. It was a very simple way to do it, like walk out, stand outside for an hour, and then walk in or walk back in. One of the challenges was also that because it was so disorganized, then like I went to a lot of these wildcard strikes, and often they stood there and they didn't really knew what to do or what to chant. But a lot of them also came after it and learned it along the way. And you saw a lot of like nurses starting to coordinate as well and started to make alliances also with carers and stuff. And right now we're facing a situation where so the nurses stopped the strike and the government ended up giving them some money. It did not solve the problem at all, but the need for a pay raise is something that's being talked about a lot. The need to to do something about the gender pay gap is also a very hot topic, and we're having general agreement negotiations in 2024, which I mean a lot of public sector workers are ready for that, and the nurses are definitely ready for that. So yeah, that is a very long summary, but it's just to say that this is one of the very interesting things happening right now, looking at Denmark.
And to add something in regards to that, like there's unfortunately also been an attack on the organic leaders leaving the sector. It's a whole new strategy, also been using by employees. Usually we've seen this in like the private sector, but not as much in the public sector, of people getting so aggressively harassed by like the government essentially. So like it's like telling people that like you will lose your job, like and threatening them like that they have to go to work. And then like these people felt so forced to leave. So people they was all seen as troublemakers, but good people, good nurses, good colleagues were thrown out and had to change their jobs, switch their jobs, leave a sector that they like. And for me, this kind of sacrifice that you try to do in your sector in regards to you care for your colleagues, you care for your patients, you care for your society, your community, and the government is essentially doing this against you. For me, is like a big betrayal, and especially also if you look at a government that is aligned with the labor movement, when the Social Democrats either implicitly by ignoring you essentially don't give a shit about you. For me, this shows me why the people are getting so disenfranchised and don't even want to vote for left parties anymore. So just to pick this up again, we also see like an aggressive stance towards people speaking up in their workplaces, even in government situations where people are actually getting more protected in their freedom of speech.
Yeah, so increased union busting, essentially.
Yeah, I thought the government was supposed to let the employers and the unions work it out themselves. That seems like cheating.
It is cheating.
On the topic of government involvement, Rasmus, can you clarify this self-employment and employment situation, both like how it's defined by the government, if at all, and practically how it works for workers when they are covered by general agreement, when not, how the unions are involved, etc.
That's a very broad discussion, Rob. And I'll try to make it brief by summarizing some of the points that are actually made right now. in the current discourse, because it's a discourse that's been going on for a while now. And it's really interesting because historically it hasn't really been that's much of an issue in certain sectors. It's been growing and growing and growing and growing, but essentially this whole misclassification is really recent and new and emerging. So, in regards to how social dialogue is made in legislation, it's based on recognizing relations as they're inherently operating. So that means that we have never actually had like a really coherent definition, juridical, legislative definition in regards to what a worker is. So, in bits of legislation, for example, insurance, immigration law, but also the whole type of like legislation in regards to employees is based on this. So, if you're not covered by an employee relation, you just set out like different kinds of legislation that inherently doesn't make sense for you anymore. So you're not entitled to sick pay, holiday benefits, freedom of speech, even like you're not protected by anything because you can't go and say my workplace is inherently misclassifying me, for example, because they see you as a company. Like for example, when you're for example like self-employed, you have your own company. Like I would be able to set up my own like business and contract and stuff like that. But the problem is a lot of these companies now, and also for my situation as well, I've been working at a workplace where there's been one thing in regards to that we don't have control over our clients. So even being self-employed by using an app on my phone, a partner app, I have essentially been taking tasks from this app that I don't have any shares in. I don't even know like what the incentives are for like what kind of commission that they have to pay each restaurant. So all of these kind of things are like bogus. So we call this bogus self-employment. So what the whole thing that's been happening in Europe and essentially also in Denmark right now is because there's been an emergence of these platforms, especially in the food delivery sector. We have companies like I can just mention a few like Foodora, Deliverit, Just Eat, Wolt. There's like gorillas and so on and so on and so on. Some of these are under like normal employee relation status, but some of them aren't. And the companies that are not, they have thought about like how can we profit maximize this. So they are like market intruders. Like they use intrusive tactics that like our market is unstable. Like the companies here, for example, Just Eat is really interesting in regards to this. Like Deferando, they say, "Oh, we have these disruptors. They are not playing by the law and stuff like that. Why are we then supposed to play by the law?" So because this has been happening, this is like an interest from both the left and the right that essentially the class compromise that like the welfare state has made, the social dialogue is set apart when we are being bogus self-employed. So like there's both an interest from like the Danish employee associations and also the Danish labor movement and the restaurants and like society as a whole to fix this shit, because the misclassification has a lot of implications in tax, insurance, and companies being mistreated, essentially.
And yeah, something I want to add to what you're saying, Rasmus, is also that, of course, this companies calling workers self-employed is, of course, like, it's a part of a like larger trends of precarization. I worked both on a 0-hour contract and as a self-employed, and we have also seen an increase in 0-hour contracts in Denmark. And even though they share a lot of the same traits, then when I worked on a 0-hour contract, I didn't have to report my own taxes. That was taken care of. I got all the equipment I needed. I worked at a school, so it wasn't like I needed that much work, that I needed that much work equipment. That sentence was difficult for some reason, as such. But for instance, if one of the kids broke my phone, my workplace would replace it for me. Stuff like that. That did not apply to me when I worked as self-employed. Had to report my own taxes, and like for me as a native Danish speaker, who's also doing a university degree, the tax system is difficult to figure out. A lot of my coworkers were new in Denmark, did not speak Danish. The English webpage, the English tax webpage, is not very helpful. And obviously you have to provide all your own equipment. So I think something that's very central to understand about this loophole that companies have found calling workers self-employed is also that it is really the example of the most extreme case of outsourcing of employer responsibility. And yeah, I would any day prefer a 0-hour contract over being quote unquote self-employed. And not that 0-hour contracts are great. They're really not. They're pretty shit as well.
And there's also a pattern in regards to this, because that so why are there so many people working in these companies? Because food delivery is actually growing, and we actually see a number of self-employed or registered self-employed couriers working. And there are, for me, two primary reasons. One of them is based on how this whole sector, it's a business, it's a unofficial business practice. And what I'm gonna say might sound conspiratorial as fuck, but in Denmark, there's been happening a lot of restrictions in regards to migration and immigration over the last 5 or 6 years. For almost a decade now, you have seen a lot of restrictions for earnings that you need if you don't have a European work permit, if you're not in the Schengen zone. So if you're not a part of any European Union country, you need to earn something in regards to your stay in Denmark. And if you don't do that, you get deported. And that's a whole lot of money. So, for example, if you come from countries like Syria, if you come from countries like Eritrea, these are also some countries where some of our colleagues come from. They work 17, 18 hours. And I said something about that you have with employee legislation in regards to this, like that you need like a resting time. Like this is required. It's regulated through a normal contract, a work contract of 16 or 17 hours, if I recall. These people work like crazy. They work 10 hours every day on a bike, on a scooter, in a car. And the companies are dependent on these full-timers. So it's people making hazardous deliveries, but also, these companies rely on this because they don't want to spend money on this. They want to just do profit maximizing. Wolt is a special case in this because because a lot of these self-employed couriers, they sometimes, and it's actually regarded to the season sometimes, it's like how the wind blows, because there's a lot of onboarding and a lot of turnover. So of course, like trying to talk about like who is the courier and what's the courier mindset, it changes like during the seasons. But a lot of them, in my own experience, is that they actually see the company as an employer, but they also see themselves sometimes as self-employed. But when they see Wolt as an employer and they've actually been trying to fight for stuff like that, we have gotten stuff like insurance, for example. When you're a Wolt courier, you're self-employed, but you have an insurance like a workplace would have an insurance. And but then there's like other companies, right, like Fedora, like so a lot of couriers are also multi-apping, which is like trying to maximize the amount of work that you have. I was also multi-apping when I was doing Wolt because it was going bad sometimes, and Fedora doesn't have like a self-insurance, like insurance. So, for example, if I get hit by a car, it's my own fault. And then sometimes they call you, like I was called this week. They were asking me if I could take any shifts, and I'm like, okay, interesting. Like, am I not supposed to be self-employed? Like, I want to go on when I want to go on. Like, this is not how it's supposed to work. Like, I have my own company. I still have my own company now, even though like I work several career jobs. I have my own business. Like, and that's the problem with this. And then we also have the other one, like the other part of this workforce, the students, the students who are here on like expat students, exchange students, for them to receive social like any of the social benefits, they also have to work. So two workforces, the full timers coming from extreme precarity, and the other ones, people who, if they want to stay and study or try to make a better living, then they need to, because the government has essentially made them like to say how it is, a forcible work situation.
I want to hear some of the stories of what it's like to organize at Wolt. How is it? Just you can take it any direction you want. I do at some point want to hear about the Facebook group. I'm very curious about this giant Facebook group and some of the discussions that happen in there.
Okay, so I think Freya also has a lot to add in this, but there are essentially three kinds of ways that we have been trying to go and organize my colleagues. One of them is the direct, where we meet and we try to talk to people. The second one is actually when I've had the advantage of meeting couriers and very busy restaurants or hotspots. And the third one is actually when we actually get in contact with couriers. The first one is actually something we have been trying to engineer or try to change or modify in what patterns has been done. For example, you can't just go up to someone and say, hello, join our union and read our fucking general agreement. Like, that's not how stuff works. So basically, Freya and I, we have been standing outside of McDonald's 2 winters in a row every fucking Thursday for 3 hours when it's been fucking cold, when COVID was hitting us, and just talking to couriers. And we try to gather context. We try to hear about like how keep up the good negotiation, the social dialogue, like what's going on. How we need to know who's actually on the streets, but also like who's still doing this full time, because like we need to focus on which groups and which group of people are actually those who are most dependent on the job, because these are the people we are going to see a lot. And this is also based a lot about, there are a lot of divides. Understanding this as a workplace is also very sectarian. Like, people divide themselves into different communities based on language and culture. And then we also have like the Danish exception. The Danes are the Danish Wolt couriers are a very special vocal minority of people who are really, what can I say, special. Which are there. It's not people that we have been focusing a lot on. Like, we have mostly been focusing on people who are dependent on the job and want to stay in this sector as well. So students is also something that we have been like not that involved in, because it has not made any sense for us to do that in regard to that. But mostly full timers. It's people who work as I said, 10, 12 hours a day. They most of them also actually have family. Believe it or not, like people actually don't just like go to sleep at a hostel and then they go out and work again. It's people who have a livelihood. Like if they don't go out and work, they will get kicked out. Simple as that. The second thing that we do, or I've been doing this as well, and a lot of the other couriers that we organize with, is talking to couriers on the job. This is very stressful because like you go into a mind of like, of course you don't want to preach, you don't want to like do preaching to the choir. Like you just listen and you ask a lot of questions, and then you say hello. We are some couriers who actually want to see our community talk about like our situation. We want to see our community, that we know a lot of people on the streets. We see each other a lot. Like I know who you are. You have seen me in the streets 5 days in a row. Why don't we ever talk to each other? Can I get your WhatsApp? And then I just have a contact contact list of a lot of couriers. Sometimes after that, like I try to arrange like we can meet up, not talk union stuff, but like talk about courier stuff. Courier stuff is broad. It can be anything. It can be talking about equipment. It can be talking about different restaurants that are really shitty. But genuinely try to make the connection, because like unionizing, of course, that's a political, not a political project. It's a project of something we want to do, but it's always in the background. Like unionizing is more like like it's a phenomena rather than actually like you can't push like people to like you. Like you need to prevent people like just being a normal person. And the third one, as you mentioned, the big Facebook group. It's a shit show, but like it's what can I say? It's our way of trying to talk to people that we don't really usually don't meet, and it's more of a con than a pro. But in this way, and unfortunately also this time of digital organizing, we need to like also be dependent on this. There are some, of course, like not all couriers agree, and like we do a lot of like discussion in regards to this of like saying, I don't want to force like I say this to everyone. Like people know my agenda. Like I have an agenda. I say to them I have an agenda. Not hello, my name is Gazellen. I have an agenda. But like they say I'm a member of 3F. Like I want a collective bargaining agreement. You can't you can't lie to people and say like I know these 3F guys. Like I've been very frank. Like I say we can talk about your discussion if you want to change something and stuff like that, but you know my position on this. I want to support what you want to do. For example, if people want to get like help a colleague get reinstated, if people want to like arrange something, then we have been up to doing that. Sometimes this has been heavily based on blind faith, and it can go in every direction. But like pushing yourself out in this has also made us a lot more resilient to getting things done, getting insurance, talking about courier harassment, like keeping up these discourses. Like it's been very important for us to do this. Yeah, I hope that was like an attempt to try to maximize or like summarize the points. Freya,
Yeah.
maybe you can add some more to this.
Yeah, and also just one concrete thing I want to highlight is now we talked a bit about insurance, and that's actually one of the victories, like minor victories, but still like a very important victory that we gained. So if we go back to like 2019, the insurance that Wolt couriers were covered by was it was only like they were only insurance money. They were only eligible for like receiving insurance money if they went blind, if they died, or if they were hospitalized. It was this extreme case. So they had insurance on paper, but if you actually read what the insurance covered, it was absolutely ridiculous. Then one Wolt courier had a bike crash and got a very bad bone fracture, and he was not covered by insurance. And we started a petition and tried to push for better insurance, and then Wolt actually ended up including bone fractures in the insurance. Obviously, still far from the standard insurance that a lot of people are covered by in Denmark. But it is an example of that we have actually managed to gain some small victories and to build some power. And I think in relation to what you said, Rasmus, there are two things when it comes to how we try to organize. There's the build a structure part. That's also building a Facebook group that's not moderated by Wolt, where we try to add people. A lot of couriers are very confused what this Facebook group is. They often think that it is the official Facebook group managed by Wolt or moderated by Wolt. Which has resulted in some funny misunderstandings sometimes. It's also a part of building structure. It's also getting people's contacts, as Rasmus mentions, and basically letting people know that the union exists and that Wolt Workers Group exists. Then there's also the other aspect of our organizing effort, trying to activate people and try to provide concrete support. So this is taking on cases, as we did with the courier who had a bone fracture, trying to take on that case. 3F took it to court, even though he wasn't organized at the time, which is also, something I think, generally speaking, working with 3F has, the 3F has definitely been willing to make an effort, also more of an effort than you often see these mainstream unions make. That's for sure. We've also held bike repair workshops, tax meetings where people can learn how to pay their taxes, and of course, also there are also a few people who've been become active in the Wolt Workers Group. I think the thing to understand about Wolt couriers and what can be difficult in the case of Wolt specifically, and where it differs from Gorillas or Flink in Germany, is that the earnings are actually quite good sometimes when there's a high demand. The money can be quite good, especially if you compare it to cleanings or the cleaning sector, restaurant sector. You can earn more working as a courier. But it's also very much here and now money. And that's also the thing, a general agreement is not going to increase their earnings a lot. It is going to provide a more long-term security. But it's not going to be a massive increase in earnings. And maybe it's even going to be compared to when there's an absolute peak, it's maybe even going to be a decrease. But then the thing is that the salary is not going to be fluctuating that much. You're always secured a somewhat stable pay. But a lot of couriers are very much, for very good reason. It makes sense, right? But it's very much focused on how much can I earn here now? How much can I earn tomorrow? Because people need money. We all do. And we have also faced a bit of distrust when it comes to, unions in Denmark are incredibly institutionalized. And this is no secret, and couriers also know this. So there's definitely also been a bit of distrust, which has proven difficult. On one hand, being a part of Wolt Workers Group, which is very much a grassroots union group, has been good in terms of resources, and I think 3F has tried to also let us do our own thing to a certain extent. But it has also proven difficult because you are automatically a part of a very institutionalized union system that comes with some limitations sometimes. So that is also one of the dilemmas when it comes to trying to do grassroots within a major institution. You look like you want to say something, Rasmus.
Yeah. But a thing which I have learned a lot about this organizing and why I have never actually been like disenfranchised because, like, to be honest, this sector is fucking terrible, like, to organize, because the sustainability and the future, and like nobody thinks about that. Not even the fucking companies. Like, they just change name or rebrand themselves, so like get bought by another like fucking shareholder or something. It's like the power of community, that it's very reliant on people that you know. Like, as soon as you actually lose the faces on people that you try to organize with, your power extinguishes, like, if from one day to another. Like, if you don't talk to people, like, you know this as well. Like, if I sometimes compare this like to having a partner. For example, if you go and never see your partner, and you're just like, hey, do you want to go out for dinner tonight or something? And they're like, no, I haven't seen you in like a fucking year or something. Of course, like, people will treat you as like a stranger. This is not based on life experience, but
Hard lessons.
hard lessons. Yeah. All of the breakups, all of them. But I think we have shown, when we have actually like gotten actual phases, and we talk to couriers, and couriers are in the steering and vehicle of change, which is something what Workers Group has been really good at, because we are not we are not dependent on legislation, because legislation can't help us. Like, we tell people frankly, like, I spoke to a courier, which we got reinstated like half a year ago, something. He shared our story with us and stuff like that. We found like his post on Reddit, where he said that he got terminated for some really weird grounds, like from one day to another. The same kind of reasons that I was kicked in, like losing his income from one day to another. Not the same reasoning. Mine's is actually like they gave me a reason and stuff like that, which is weird. Anyway, but we said to him really frank, like, we can't help you with like getting a lawyer. We can't help you with like getting your job back from one day to another. I can't promise you anything, like, but what I can give you is the faith that we have a strong enough community that will actually give a shit. And when people start giving a shit, stuff gets done. We made one post, and we started like we were making a warning that we were gonna make a petition. We're gonna make hell. He got reinstated the day after. Like, for me, Bolt doesn't know, they can't monitor this kind of power, and because it's so explosive, is the reason why this grassroots organizing is so potent on change, but is also very, very, very strange of like trying to do something about. So it doesn't work in like a fixed structure.
Rasmus, can you talk about the strike that you organized recently and what happened afterwards?
Okay, so just to make a disclaimer, I wasn't actually organizing it. I was participating in something that was actually going on. So, and I just need to really clarify that for obvious
I'm not
reasons
suggesting anything.
and cases and stuff like that. Anyway, so I and Freja and some other of our rank and filers in the group got in contact and know some of the Argentinian community of couriers. They have been really, really, really restless in regards to the impotence of increases in the sector. Like, wage increases hasn't been done per tag for over 2 years. So how measurements are done for wage increases is based on per distance, and the task fee is like 35 kroner, which is like €5 or something. Yeah, €5. Imagine that also being really shitty during an energy crisis and inflation in all of Europe, and like your so-called partner doesn't want to fucking meet up and talk about this is a problem. So people got really, really, really angry. And these couriers here, we have been trying to support them for a long time. Like, we've been talking and meeting up at different hubs where couriers are close by it, actually, to try and organize with them. So they know us. and like we have been supporting and doing a lot of assistance in their work, but it's been them who's like being at the forefront. So they announced that they wanted to do a rally the day on the election, which was a surprise for everyone. And we have had some difficulties in trying to organize for a while with them as well, because like there are some, as I said, not everyone agrees on which strategy or even have a coherent strategy. So it means that like the food delivery scene in Denmark is not heavily fractured. Like we know people who are in different situations, but they don't always want to talk. Excuse me. Yeah, we showed up at the rally and wanted to support them, and we didn't really know like what kind of like surprise of how many people would come, and then suddenly we were 10, then we were 60, and then we were 80 people at Nørrebro's Runde, which is like in the center, in the heart of the city. And it was crazy. People got like, we can actually shut down operations. So it evolved into a wildcat where people went online, they started taking orders, and then they just waited almost an hour, because in our contract, if you don't take, you can reject tasks within an hour without any penalties. So I know couriers has done this before, but this was like a trying to like not make a work stoppage, but like work by rule action. Does it make sense? Yeah. So like it was a strike. So what happened was that we went around the whole city. We went around also when the politicians were meeting up, like to talk about and announcing the parliament election is going on. You can actually see like a rally of Wolt couriers coming behind and honking on their scooters and stuff like that. It was crazy, and like I was reluctant on like trying to engage myself fully, because it was for example, they know what I am, but I was a minority in this situation as well. So I didn't want to go and say blah, 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 because I didn't organize it. I wasn't organizing it with Wolt Workers Group. We were supporting them, but we were asked to hold a speech at the town square, and there I talked about us trying to ally ourselves with the other like courier groups, and talking about the German conditions and the Belgian conditions, the French conditions, stuff like that. Like why that it doesn't make sense for us not to try and unite our powers. But I also said that Wolt is probably going to shit on us. Like they will try to make a PR move. They usually do this. So don't get yourself ahead. That even if they show themselves, we need to keep our pressure. And lo and behold, we came up to the headquarters, where the demo was supposed to end. They came out with a cargo bike filled with soda. Keep in mind that people have been trying to organize and trying to pressure Wolt for this claim for almost 6 or 7 months. This has been a claim for wage increases since a strike in February, actually, last year. These people are living from hand to mouth. People come out with soda. They try to give you a soda and they say like, this is an invitation to like a bogus dialogue, essentially, in their view. And I was so, I must say, involved emotionally at this point that I got angry. I was speaking to them in Danish and said to them, you only do this because these are migrants. You wouldn't even fucking take this yourself if this was a Dane. Like, you wouldn't negotiate yourself with soda. How dare you? 5 weeks after, the day before the election day, I got a mail that I received that I was terminated. I was terminated for using my time as a Wolt courier. In this letter, they say, for using every day to criticize the premise of the partnership, that I wasn't taking it serious. And the second claim, that I was threatening one of their workers. I can't go to court with this because I am a company. They terminated or deactivated me, rather, actually, from one day to another. I lost a month's wages. I am now in a situation where, because we also went public with this, essentially now everyone knows this mail of termination. So now people can read and make up their own minds of this termination letter, whether or not I have been threatening. To live with this uncertainty creates a really anxious situation, to be honest. Like, of course, I live with a precarity on that it has taken a lot of personal issues with me. Like I had to, like my family is of course really stressed about this as well. A lot of my friends are really stressed about this. And I was, yeah, and I'm broke. Like, I don't, like I'm financially on my feet again now because I got a new job, fortunately, and I was multi-apping at the time as well, so I could readjust. But they essentially, yeah, terminated me. I have a suspicion, a growing suspicion, it has something to do with my union organizing. But I cannot go to court because I'm a company and I'm not protected by legislative grounds. So this claim, or whatever the fuck I think in regards to this, doesn't even matter because we can't get a court ruling. And because we can't get a court ruling, I'm in a situation where I don't know why they fired me. They can say whatever they want. They have been using a lot of time to talk about my grounds, my motives, my motivations, who I am as a person. I have been called a revolutionary trying to disrupt the Danish delivery sector. I've been called a troublemaker. I've been called a agent. I've been called a mole. But most of all, I have been dehumanized. I get really offended personally. They have, they can go home to themselves, have the and operate as they want to. Nobody has been hurt. Like, I have not. There haven't been thrown any they haven't filed any suing or something like that. And I think for me, in being in this uncertainty, is actually more powerful for them because they have destroyed essentially my livelihood.
Well, like you said, the any kind of action from the workers, you can expect something from the company, whether it's PR or both in public and behind the scenes, you can say.
Yeah. And the problem with this, I'd say, is also with the Danish media narrative. It has been focusing a lot on me. To be honest, like I'm a grain of salt in this. Like I'm not a grain of salt. Like a small sand grain. Like I'm not fucking important in this. Like I'm not the European Parliament. I am not an association. I'm not a union federation. I'm just a fucking rank and filer. Honestly, biking around, earning 35 kroner for each tech. Like what the fuck did I ever say or do or talk to? Like I won't do anything. Like I don't have influence on the financial markets. Like the shareholders and anyone doesn't even fucking know me. Like they don't give a shit. And for them to do this, I'm still really shocked because I didn't think that they'd do it, and also they have essentially made it clear that they don't want rank and file union activity going on, at least in the views of my colleagues. After I got
What?
fired, there was a small wildcat strike, but it's the first time that we've ever actually had to shroud our faces visibly. People don't want to be seen anymore, associated with Wolt Workers Group in public, because people are afraid of losing their income.
Yeah. Can you explain quickly why you thought they wouldn't fire you, or what the protections are, or what the standard is usually for union
Union
activists or
busting
union
is illegal
organizers?
in Denmark. Like, but we don't know if they have actually done union busting. Like in principle, like we could discuss this in like from Copenhagen to Berlin, like in a train, and discuss all of these principalities. And essentially, what I mean in this is like, if we don't have a court ruling, whatever I think about this doesn't give, like, it doesn't mean anything. Of course, we have protections, but but I'm just seen as like a subcontracted company. So they just cut off the ties, and like I have to live with that. Essentially, I have also been active in, like, I'm a public face. Like they know me. I'm the gazelle, of course. And because of this, they know me. Like the Volt as a company knows the key, like, faces outward. Like they know Freja, they know me, they know, like, it's not as like we're any important people. Like we're just like a bunch of different people discussing and participating in the discourse. But I'm not like prohibited to talk about Volt. Like I'm not I'm not restricted in any kind of way. I don't have like we have a loyalty pledge in normal work contracts. I'm not prohibited by that, and even by loyalty contracts and loyalty pledge, you still have freedom of speech. So this is always a discussion. But this doesn't really reflect on the whole freedom of speech, but inherently this has something to do with it. Of course, like union organizing is inherently forbidden in sectors that are using misclassification as a business practice.
What's the sorry, do you want to say something?
And maybe also just a bit of background, because you asked what are the protections, or like how are you protected being a platform worker. And on paper, nothing. Like there are no protections, as we already discussed. And I think also to tie it all together, I think why it also made sense for us to start talking about like the Danish labor market in general, the attitude towards unionizing in Denmark, is also that like the unions are really, really afraid of this loophole in the legislation, of this way of self-employing people. This also means that 3F has been attacking Wolt quite a lot, also publicly in the media. Wolt has hired like several PR people just to sort of like counter these attacks. Like it's always the same person who will like go forward in the media and like try to defend Wolt. So Wolt is definitely afraid of getting a bad rep. And a lot of people in Denmark, exactly because of this historical debt that we talked about before, this idea that like we owe the union movement a lot of the security, a lot of the comfortability that we have in Danish society today. This can be traced back to the early labor movements, and we have some like debt to the union movement. This also means that even though union density is declining, a lot of people in Denmark are quite positive towards unions, generally speaking, and are and have a quite negative attitude towards like these big multinational companies. So Wolt is definitely afraid of getting a bad rep. this is not the first time that Wolt is being criticized in the media by couriers. Back in 2018, when Wolt Workers Group started, this happened. Like, there were couriers criticizing Wolt during Corona. There was a lot of media attention. A lot of couriers who were active in Wolt Workers Group back then went on national TV, prime time, and criticized Wolt. But this is the first time that couriers who have publicly criticized Wolt has been terminated. And when I heard that you've been terminated, Rasmus, I was really, I was a bit shocked, and I was also very worried, because I couldn't help thinking that if they are not afraid to terminate you now, like, you don't have any protection on paper, but if they have taken the step to terminate you, knowing that you would probably raise hell in the media, knowing that they would have to endure a bit of bad press, then, like, who are then protected? Like, if they are going to terminate you, someone who's, like, quite vocal, has a lot of, like, contact to the media, who's Danish, a lot of, like, your co-workers are very easy to terminate then. And as you mentioned, there were 80 people participating in that protest. So I think this marks a bit of a shift as well. Also, like, what steps Wolt and other platform companies are willing to take, and how secure they are of themselves. Mm. And now Rasmus want to say something. Have we cut you off, Rob? Do you want to steer this in a different direction?
But I think that was also, like, really important in regards to understanding the primary reasoning why I'm also really scared or worried or anxious right now is, like, because we know that they monitor people, like, they know, and we know, like, right now we are gathering evidence for people that we know got terminated, and I'm getting a lot of personal messages right now by people that I know have gotten terminated, and it's heartbreaking. Like, I can endure getting my name shit by like, for me that doesn't really matter anymore. Like, they have like, they can call me whatever they fucking want right now. Like, I don't know what to do. So, and my name it's gonna be forever, at least for the moment, with, like, being a shit steer or something. I don't know. But for me, what's most important is actually the people the full-timers, the people that we have been talking to, the people who are in a situation where where legislative, that the unofficial business practice that I talked about, that they are dependent, like, that they are, let me say how it is, enslaved, if they continue in this employment relation, to keep working 12 hours a day, like, instead of fucking taking a break. Like, how can they be vocal? And if they are vocal, where they gonna get this, like, the same kind of earnings? And that really scares me. Like, I thought that we had a general understanding, like a peace. Like, of course, like, we would say, like I will say, I've been critical of a lot of times, but we were thinking, and I think, like, it was a general consensus in our organizing efforts, of, like, we have moral standards. Like, we are not gonna shit on, like, people, like, managers and stuff like that. We can talk about the broader issues, but they go after our rank and file. When they go after our rank and filers, and they go after, like, people that are affiliated with us, I get scared and anxious, like, really anxious. Are they drawn into a corner, or is this just like a theatrical play? Because, like, Wolt is also doing, like, collective bargaining agreements with 3F right now, right? But how does that even, like, play into when they can also terminate people who are vocal about the workplace? Like, what is a general agreement for if you can't discuss your workplace right now?
What are the prospects of getting a general agreement with Wolt? Could that happen soon?
So I'm not at the negotiations table, and if I were I don't know. Sorry. um, the prospects right now are actually pretty good and fruitful, as far as I know. So that's why it's also very interesting that they did this at this point in time. We know that they meet frequently, and I think the dialogue is also very good. But like, you need to understand that these companies are multinational companies, so they operate. So even though if there might be some managers or some people higher up who are sympathetic to the like to how like 3F is negotiating the different standardizations of like making general agreements, or like trying to stretch themselves a little bit more. Like they have to standardize after, like, because how the general standard sorry, is in the sector, not sector, in the whole business family. Wolt is owned by DoorDash, so DoorDash won't go lower than, rather than all of DoorDash will go under, and it's an American company, and we know about America. Like, things need to be shitty, right?
Yeah. Regardless of what happens with the outcome of the general of the bargaining agreement, what can be done, and what are the prospects for continuing to organize or building or an organic, like, empowered workforce? And I know you talked about European and international organizing, so maybe that's a part of it. But what do you how can that continue regardless of what's decided?
I think it's very important to try to connect. For me, having links to different companies, trying to revitalize or re-energize or rediscover, as Freja also said, labor traditions is really important. Like, the Danish labor movement has actually been very impressive in regards to this. Like almost advanced, like, than any other chapter of like labor movements. We have had international links to like every fucking country, and use these to try to understand our sectors, our industry, our key in being a vehicle for change, for getting to fight for a world where people are before profit. You don't see that as much later in the history, because we start to isolate ourselves, and this isolationism is something that our sector in food delivery is essentially is challenging, because the market incentive is so based on foreign capital and foreign workforces that you will get to have to talk to colleagues that don't share your first name or your skin color or your language. So for me, trying to understand and get to know these links, especially also with when I know that these companies are operating in other countries, is really important for doing this, because there's a lot of turnover. But I know, like, I know there's like Robs in every different other country. Like, there are other rank and filers who are still interested in the sector, and keeping those links is really important for us to like understand how this infrastructure works, and and these companies work.
Freya, did you have anything to add?
I think what are the future prospects of organizing? I think the thing about organizing is also understanding that organizing is a marathon. In many ways, like, it is really about getting to know people and building community. And regardless of whether or not Wolt signs a general agreement, we need to keep doing this. And I think it's very important that we acknowledge that a general agreement can ensure us that Wolt is not gonna like change or pay or change the pay for couriers overnight. But it cannot ensure us like that we will have the working conditions of our dreams. General agreements are also something that, essentially is a piece of paper. And if no one knows that it exists, then it's a useless piece of paper. looking at platforms in Denmark. There's a cleaning platform called Hilfe that has had a general agreement since 2017. It was the first platform that ever signed a general agreement. This general agreement was negotiated without any of the cleaners working on the platform actually knowing it. They're not aware of the fact that it exists. And it's complete. You can talk about greenwashing and pinkwashing. I would call this general agreement washing. So I think really talking about what's ahead and what's the future prospect, then it is really just about continuing building these relations and also understanding that even though there's a lot of turnover, even though that our colleagues today are not the same colleagues that we'll have in a year, and I'm not working as a courier anymore either. But if people gain a bit of experience and actually get the experience that sticking together with other people, talking about the issues that we experience and organizing around it it can push for something better. It can be a way to push for something better. Then they also carry this experience with them. Wherever, whether they go to Germany or Argentina or one of the people I used to organize with in Wolt Workers Group, Jan, he's now studying to become a nurse, and I have zero doubts that he's going to raise hell in the hospital sector as well. And he's also started to organize with the nurses union. So yeah, I think what's ahead is the long marathon of organizing, regardless of whether we get a general agreement or not, and then acknowledging that even though that there are not massive changes tomorrow, then if people get the sense that we can build power, that's never lost.
Yeah. And I forget, one of you said that organizing was about knowing and trusting one another, whether that's sharing a meal or supporting someone in their other life or career ambitions if it takes them to another country or another workplace. And the fact that I even know who the two of you are shows that you two have been doing something right up in Copenhagen. I think a lot of people know who you are. So I think that must mean you two are pretty good organizers.
Yippa.
Likewise.
Is there anything else you want to add? I would also ask you to share, Rasmus, I know you're a bit of a writer. I've read some of your pieces online. If you'd like to share anything in particular where people can find you or get more Rasmus in their life, or more Gazellen, I should say.
Yeah, so I have had a few published pieces. One that I might highlight for your listeners would be the one on the Bedriftsrats election, because it's more local. It's really interesting for me to look at how the whole organization actually went about. It was a report made from an outsider view, and it shows some really interesting things of what we could learn from a Danish perspective. And I think sometimes when outsiders are looking into and existing structures, it gives some new insights. Then we also made a joint article in Danish in the biggest Danish newspaper. But that's
I had to brush up on my Danish, but it was fun to write. I will link to that in the description. Your Twitter account, Freja. Do you have any social accounts you'd like to?
No, I'm a shitty Jenset. I'm a very shitty Jenset. I was. As you mentioned, Rasmus and Europe and me did an article, which is in Danish and even behind a paywall, so it's as inaccessible as it could possibly be. Rasmus, you're the vocal one, the public figure.
I'm sure people will be hearing from one or both of you again in the future. Okay, that's it. Thank you both so much for coming on. That was very thorough, as it should be.
Yep.
We will see you all next week. Bye.